this is Christina Barton. You're watching Black Tea News. Hello, hello. Welcome to Black Tea News. I'm your host, Christina Barr, and today we're going to be talking about this clip that's I've seen floated around Twitter of Elmo on Sesame Street talking about how Black people are. Well, someone is telling Elmo that Black people are treated differently because of their skin color, and I just think that preemptive sort of information to lodge into children's heads in their formative years um, instills within certain people a victim mentality and instills pity in the other people who are not Black, and it just exacerbates the issue of racism rather than really solving it. So I want to talk about that. Also, in Michigan, the Detroit News released a story about a recording of Donald Trump and Ronna McDaniel, who's the RNC chair, was on a call when they tried to get the Wayne County Board of Canvassers to not certify the Wayne County election. It was a big dramatic thing that happened at the time when people were going through the election and challenges and all sorts of different stuff. So I want to go through that article today. It's pretty big news. Now it's pretty big news. I guess the Detroit News wants you to know because they put everything behind a paywall. Everything is always behind a paywall, but they're not today. So this is leaking out to major news and stuff. So it's a pretty, I don't know, I guess big deal, especially because there's people in Michigan who are being prosecuted because of what happened after the election, particularly the electors. So we'll talk about that. I do not know what the recording, the reporting on the recording is basically what the story is. I have not heard the recording, and they do not link it in the story itself. I don't know if they will or won't release it. I would assume maybe they would, maybe they are, I don't know. Also Joe Biden is or has, I guess, pardoned preemptively people who are caught with marijuana, but just simple possession of marijuana, which a lot of people plead down with their marijuana charges. I don't think there's a lot of people in jail because of them simply possessing marijuana, which leads to some interesting legal questions, because some people swore up and down that you can't preemptively pardon people, which isn't really the case because we know that that's happened before, but with presidents, particularly Carter. So interesting commentary to add there when we get to that particular segment. But before we jump into it, I encourage you guys to go to blacktnews.com, check out different articles, videos, etc. If you like what I do here, please consider leaving a donation at blacktnews.com/donate. It does cost a stream, run my website, all that stuff, so you guys can support in that way. I do very much appreciate it. Check out different merch that's at the store, like the shirt I have on today. I'm not the victim that you're looking for. So that's available at blacktnews.com, along with some other things that you can check out, like the Be Better Not Better. I suppose these shirts kind of go with the theme of the trash talk about the Sesame Street thing going on, which Sesame Street is not the only one, but we'll get to that segment. I also have mugs and so on, so check that out. Also, please check out my books that are available on Amazon. I have stuff for young adults and children and so on. I have 17 books altogether, and 2 are nonfiction. The rest are, range from like action adventure, historical fiction, fantasy, contemporary fantasy, paranormal romance. I have an idea. I pen it. I put it down on paper, and I like to just express myself and get it out. So between the gospel and anime and Star Trek and comic books, all the things I loved growing up and stuff. I have a pretty wild imagination. So again, you guys can find my stuff on Amazon, but if you go to blacktnews.com and go to the merchandise page, there's a banner that will take you over to my book websites where you can learn more about everything that I've made. So appreciate your interest and appreciate you guys checking it out. Thank you to those of you who are watching live and to those who will watch back later. Um, this is the last I guess show before Christmas. I Christmas is on Monday. So I plan to at least have some shows next week. Um well, I guess there's no reason why not to just have them Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, unless something comes up, cuz New Year's is um Sunday night. So we will be in church all day. We will be in church all day because we will have I don't know how we'll handle that because we usually have afternoon service. I guess we'll just still have a late service that night. Yeah. So it'll be a long day. So yeah, I assume right now that we will have with the exception of Christmas, um we'll continue having the show the rest of the week. So if something changes, I'll post something differently in on the message board on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. But expect to see me spend the holidays with me. And thank you guys for joining me. I know everyone, well, maybe everyone else has their shopping together. I didn't. I still have one more person to go. So I know it's a busy time. So I appreciate you spending your time with me. And for those of you who have been with me for a while, thank you to those who are watching for the first time. I just really appreciate it. So and I thank you to those of you who, you know, voice that you appreciate my commentary, but I very much appreciate you guys very much. So anyway, I don't have a meme, though I do want to call back to yesterday's meme thing that we showed yesterday of this Sam Britton tag. I just wanted to put out there that this is a Blaze TV, Ali Stuckey made this tag, and you guys can go find it at the Relatable website because I had posted it at first and I did not know where it was from. And while we were on air yesterday, I figured it out. So that's where that's from. I just wanted people to know. If anyone's interested, I did not make that. I kind of wish I had, but kudos to her. It is pretty hysterical, and he does really look like a bald gosh, what's his name, Matt Damon. But that is Sam Britton, the man who considered himself to be non-binary, who worked in the Biden administration and was stealing women's clothes when he would go to the airport and just would take their luggage. It was a crazy story, and I'm glad he's no longer part of this administration. But hey, that's what happens when you have diversity hires, and that matters more than anything else. Just signaling to everyone how woke and progressive you are. Speaking of woke and progressive, I'm just gonna go ahead and tackle this Elmo thing first before we get into the newsy news of the day. So this is a short clip that's been circulating around that I just people are like, "Is this real? Is this real?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's real." But here we go.
Across the country, people of color, especially in the black community, are being treated unfairly because of how they look, their culture, race, and who they are. What we are seeing is people saying enough is enough. They want to end racism.
No. Elmo wants to end racism too.
Yeah, so but I never liked Sesame Street personally. I know a lot of people, obviously it's a very popular show that's been around for a long time. I never liked, I think some of my siblings watched Sesame Street. My dad bought like a Big Bird for somebody, and I think and maybe an Elmo for somebody else, but I never liked it. I never watched it. It was never my thing. I can't really remember watching anything of the Muppets puppets sort of. I guess it just wasn't my thing. um I watched, I guess there was a puppet on Gullah Gullah Island. that was about that was about it, I guess. So I've seen some people who did used to watch the old it was my sister, she said she loved Big Bird. Um Sesame Street, who saw this and were like, you just treat everyone normal and not distinguish people in these sorts of ways, and that's how you have a less racist society. My issue with that clip, and Sesame Street is not the only one. Some time ago, it wasn't this year, probably wasn't even last year. Um, Cartoon Network also did like a cartoon with their Steven Universe characters, I think, and it was about how we need to see color. And because at first they were talking about like some saying some kind of march about how you shouldn't see color, and then they had a big discussion about why it's wrong to not see color. And then one of the I think a white person chimed up and said, yeah, I've noticed how people treat you differently because you're black or something along those lines. And so the conclusion was that everyone needs to see color, and it's wrong not to acknowledge that other people are different than you. And it's very obvious that people look different from each other, that there's different people of different ethnicities, that cultures have different customs and whatnot. And so the people pretending like they don't see that is silly. However, indoctrinating people with this idea that everyone is just baseline being treated differently because of that their skin color, it's creating an expectation of that. Like, how would you feel if your black child was just at school and this white child learned from Sesame Street that everyone's treating them so differently, and they just came up to and let's say your black child has never been treated differently because of their race, that they haven't experienced that yet, they haven't seen the world in that kind of way. Perhaps life will humble them later and hurt their feelings at some other point. But let's say their reality is not built around racism, and some white child at school comes up to them and say like, hey, I heard we treat you differently. Like, what do you do with that? Besides being really confused. And then maybe they go home and tell their mom, and then their mom tells that teacher, and that teacher has to talk to that parent and have those conversations. It just creates an expectation of division. Sometimes I watch my nieces and my nephews as they grow up, and sometimes they will fall, and they'll get right back up. And sometimes you're like, oh, well, did they hurt themselves? And you're like alarmed. And they'll get back up. Or sometimes when they fall and you freak out, and maybe they would have just went on, but you freak out, and then they freak out. And next thing you know, they start crying. And maybe if you would have just, not made a big deal about it, they would have got up, like and just moved on. Now sometimes kids fall down and they hurt themselves, and they need to be like, hugged and comforted and get a band-aid, go to hospital, whatever. But I'm sure you're aware of these different circumstances that I'm talking about. Sometimes your overreaction informs the child that they need to flip out. They're teaching these children that our world is deeply racist, and that some people are victims, and that some people are oppressing these victims, and that they need to stop it, which is good, and you need to end racism. But again, you're informing, you're breathing life into the problem. You're breathing life into the problem, and you're teaching these people that they need to see not only color, but see different trials and tribulations. And the reverse is true. If it's true that people treat people differently because they're black, and it's not just black people, it's all kinds of people are treated differently um for their color, especially if you inform people that white people are particularly racist. So if that's the sort of things that you're teaching kids, you don't think people are going to treat white people differently? Because they will. But people have convinced themselves that white people can't experience racism because they don't have because white people have the institutional power, so no one can be racist to them. They're like, they can be prejudiced toward them based on their skin I'm like, are you kidding me? Why 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 are you trying to exclude like black people, Hispanic people, Asian people? Like, we all know that those groups can be racist. We all have seen friends or relatives or other people say and do racist things. It's just a fantasy to think that basically only white people can be racist. It's just not true. So there is an incentive for people to continue being racist, or to keep racism alive so they can fight the racism. But many times I see people who are so gung-ho about defeating racism are the ones who keep breathing life into it, perpetuating, etc. These people who are like the anti-racist Ibrahim X Kendi people, etc., are the ones who are spreading so much racism. The people who are so obsessed with DEI, like you treating people differently based on their races, whether you feel that you're trying to correct a mistake or something from history. Like, don't you think that you are perpetuating and continuing racism by not treating everyone like they are the same? You can't ignore, again, that people have different customs, have different cultures, and that skin color is different. But much of our history and cultures merge when you assimilate into America and the American way of life. That doesn't mean that you still don't think aren't different. But there more things unite us than separate us, I think. Or why else would you come here if we aren't supposed to have some things that unite, and we're not supposed to share particular values and so on, and history and so on. So yes, you can notice that I'm black. It's totally okay. It's totally okay. Um, but you assuming that I'm some kind of victim, or that people treat me particularly bad, um, that's an assumption. Now I can tell you there are people who do that, but I would say not particularly because I am black specifically. It's because I mostly get negative comments because I am a black woman who happens to be conservative. And that's where people start, getting upset and want to treat you differently, and like, how dare you? You're supposed to, because they have a perception of how black people are supposed to be, which is a Democrat. And then they'll say things like, oh, you're betraying your race and all kinds of different things. But if you just treated me like an individual, and or just treat all people of all colors like they're individuals, and you got to know them and what are their likes and their interests, and why they believe certain things that they believe, you wouldn't have this ideology in your head about how certain groups are supposed to be. And if someone deviates from your worldview, that you feel like they're betraying all that they are. So it again, it's funny that people are like, we have to see the color. And like, if you don't acknowledge that people are different based on their color, then you're part of the problem. If you're not going to be the anti-racist person like Ibrahim X Kendi says, and you can't just not be racist, you have to fight the racism. But they construct these boxes for people to be in. So if you can't, you can see the color, it's still going to be here. But I really like and prefer if you would still see me as an individual. So I don't know how long it's going to take for us to get to that place. And I'm going to be pessimistic and say I'm not sure that we can get to that place, because there's people very motivated to not get to that place. And I've just kind of acknowledged that we're not at that place. I mean, part of me, having black tea is my perspective as a black conservative. My intro, it says that fresh perspective, bold perspective from a black conservative, uh, not because being black is so important or anything like that, but I just acknowledge that I have a particular perspective and people treat me like I have a particular perspective. So just kind of acknowledging how I guess the world is a bit. You know it, I know it. I guess we'd be better off if things weren't like this, but they are. They are. And again, I'm not optimistic that it will change anytime soon, especially not super soon. Especially not super soon. If people are determined to keep people like Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard, knowing that she plagiarized a bunch of people essentially because she's black, um, we're in a bad place. But you know what? There were some professors that I saw speaking up, saying that basically her being president right now is a gift to the right, because she basically is a DEI failure, and another tale of why it's bad. So I don't know. There might eventually be enough pressure to push her out, on top of them not really condemning anti-Semitism enough. I don't know. We shall see. We shall see. But anyway, moving on. So in Michigan, there's a big story out right now. And Detroit News is the one who put it out there, and so some other big news has decided to pick up the story. And this is something that they must really want out, because just about every time you click on an article on the Detroit News, it's behind a paywall. This one is not behind a paywall. And Craig Malger, he wrote this. He's been writing a lot of things about Michigan and obviously the Detroit News. I read a lot of things about Michigan, but particularly about election stuff and fighting within the Republican Party and all sorts of drama around that. Now, Detroit News, the Free Press is more like left wing, and the Detroit News is more like what the Republicans pick up and read. I think everybody basically will pick up both papers, but folks at the Detroit News, I don't know how everyone feels who's there, but there's definitely like we're not too fond of Trump and the direction of the Republican Party, kind of feel, and I think it's pretty obvious, and it just is what it is. But anyway, Trump recorded pressuring Wayne County canvassers not to certify the 2020 election. I think I'm grappling with whether pressure is a fair term. I mean, technically, I guess. But if you've just heard me say that headline and you think it's going to be something like, if you don't do this, and we're gonna, I don't know, make your life heck, or it would be very bad for you if there wasn't. I don't think I remember reading anything in the story that was anything along those lines that he said. But I mean, when the president does give you a phone call and tells you basically like not to certify, I would say that qualifies as pressure. But is there like break your legs or something, or you'll be finished kind of pressure? Not something along those lines. But I'm going to go through this article really quickly. Then President Donald Trump personally pressured two Republican members of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers not to sign the certification of the 2020 presidential election, according to recordings reviewed by Detroit News and revealed publicly for the first time. So we did know, by the way, that he made a call, but the new news is what was actually in the call. On a November 17th, 2020 phone call, which also involved Republican National Committee woman Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel, Trump told Monica Palmer and William Hartman, the two GOP Wayne County canvassers, they look terrible if they sign the documents after they first voted in opposition and then later in the same meeting voted to approve certification of the country's election results according to recordings. We've got to fight for our country, said Trump on the recordings made by a person who was present for the phone call with Palmer and Hartman. We can't let these people take our country away from us. McDaniel, a Michigan native and the leader of the Republican Party nationally, said at another point in the call, if you can go home tonight, do not sign it. We will get you attorneys. To which Trump added, we'll take care of that. Palmer and Hartman left the canvassers meeting without signing the official statement of votes for Wayne County, and the following day they unsuccessfully attempted to rescind their votes in favor of certification, filing legal affidavits claiming they were pressured. The moves from Palmer, Hartman, and Trump, had they been successful, threatened to throw the statewide certification of Michigan's 2020 election into doubt. The revelation of contents of the call with the former president comes as he faces four counts of criminal conspiracy to defraud United States and its voters of the rightful outcome of the election. Efforts to prevent certification of Democrat Joe Biden's 154,000 vote victory in Michigan are an integral part of the indictment. The call involving Trump, McDaniel, Hartman, and Palmer occurred within 30 minutes of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers meeting ending on November 17th, 2020, according to records reviewed by the news. The recordings further demonstrated the direct involvement of Trump as an incumbent president with Republican officials in Michigan in a bid to undermine Biden's win, and how some details of his efforts had remained secret as he launched a campaign to win back the White House in 2024. Neither Palmer nor McDaniel and Trump, through spokespeople, disputed a summary of the call when contacted by the news. Hartman died in 2021. The news listened to an audio that was captured in 4 recordings by someone present for the conversation between Trump and the canvassers. That information came to the news through an intermediary who also heard the recordings but who was not present when they were made. Sources presented the information to the news on the condition that they would not be identified publicly for fear of retribution by the former president or his supporters. So we don't know exactly who recorded that phone call. I have heard that Hartman recorded stuff. I'm not saying he recorded this phone call. It wouldn't be crazy if it was him. He has passed away. He could have had a recording, and someone who knew him might have known about it and might not like Trump too much, so decided to turn it over to the Detroit News, who again is posting a lot of content surrounding this topic and doesn't seem all too fond. Seem is too generous. They don't like Trump very much. I'm not saying everybody doesn't, but I think it's very clear that they don't like the direction of the Republican Party right now. It is very interesting that Ronna was on the call too, because I'm a little surprised that I guess more people aren't entangled in the elector situation. There were 16 electors who were charged for fraud. So says the Attorney General, who were Trump's electors in Michigan. So they're going through a trial process. They had preliminary hearings like last week. And some of them did. There's preliminary hearings in January and February for some of the others. One of them actually cut a deal with Dana Nessel. I don't know if anyone else got the opportunity to cut a deal, because Dana Nessel once said in a recording that she thought these people were brainwashed and there was no point in giving these people deals, and that they, believe that they were saving the country or whatever, which I find very interesting that she still decided to go ahead and prosecute these people, because I don't know how you think that they were actually trying to defraud the people of the state if they had no intention of doing so, and genuinely believe that they were doing what was right for the country, because intent is an important part of the law. But it's a little surprising that they only got the electors who did sign a document about being the electors, but they weren't really the electors because Joe Biden, was declared the winner, so he had his own set of electors. But they didn't go after, I don't know, the Trump lawyers who facilitated. They didn't go after the chair of the GOP in Michigan. Her former husband is the former attorney general, so I'm not entirely surprised. And they didn't go after the RNC chair, Ronna McDaniel, who is a Michigan native. So her being, obviously she being entangled with some of this stuff. I'm not saying that she should have been charged. I'm just saying I think it's interesting that crazy Dana Nessel didn't do it. Her being on this call is interesting. The timestamp of the first recording was 9:55 p.m. November 17th, 2020. The time was consistent with Verizon phone records obtained by the U.S. House committee that showed Palmer received calls from McDaniel at 9:53 p.m. and 10:04. Stephen Chung, a Trump campaign spokesperson, said Trump's actions were taken in furtherance of his duty as president of the United States to faithfully take care of the laws and ensure election integrity, including investigating the rigged and stolen 2020 presidential election. President Trump and the American people have the constitutional right to free and fair elections. Allegations that the 2020 election was stolen remain unproven. In Michigan, a Republican controlled state Senate committee investigated the claims and found no evidence of widespread fraud. Palmer acknowledged to the news that she and Hartman took the call from Trump in a vehicle and that other people entered the vehicle and could have heard the conversation. She said she could not, however, identify who entered the vehicle or might have heard the conversation. Palmer told the news repeatedly that she didn't remember what was stated on the phone call with McDaniel and Trump. Trump does really need to be careful about that stuff because people do record him like all the time. Like there's people who love him and record him to be like, hey, yeah, I had a phone call with the president. And there's other people who talk to him who record him. And I just, but he's even gotten in some trouble with people who he knew was recording him and still said stuff. He just needs to be so careful. There's just so many recordings of him that have backfired on him. McDaniel, a Wayne County resident, says she stood by her past push for an audit of the election in Michigan, a request she and then Michigan Republican Party chairwoman Laura Cox made in November 21st, 2020, letter to the Board of State canvassers. What I said publicly and repeatedly at the time, as referenced in my letter on November 21st, 2020, is that there was ample evidence that warranted an audit, McDaniel said in a statement. But Jonathan Kinloch, who was a Democratic member of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers in November 2020, said what happened on the call with Trump was insane. It's just shocking that the president of the United States was at the most minute level trying to stop the election process from happening, said Kinloch, a Wayne County commissioner. Despite the urging from McDaniel to seek an audit and not sign the certification, Michigan law required county canvassers across the state to prepare a statement of the votes in their counties and advance the findings to the Secretary of State's office. About 18% of Michigan's population resides in Wayne County, and there were about 878,000 votes cast there for the November 2020 election. Palmer previously said she left the November 17, 2020 Wayne County Board of Canvassers meeting prior to physically signing the certification. As she was leaving, Trump called out of a genuine concern for my safety, Palmer told reporters 3 years ago. Back then, she described the contents of the November 17th, 2020 call with Trump as, "Thank you for your service. I'm glad you're safe. Have a good night." The segments of the call reviewed by the news didn't include those comments. However, in the days after the call on November 17th, 2020, Palmer and Hartman publicly attempted to rescind their votes and said intense bullying and coercion plus bad legal advice forced them to agree to certify the election after they had voted no. And there was some kind of deal or something that they struck with allegedly with the Democrats that they weren't honest about or something. So they felt dumb for signing it or whatever. But anyway, during the interview in September 2021, Palmer told the U.S. House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol that she couldn't recall the exact words that Trump used on the call and whether he raised issues related to the election. The recording was reviewed by the news, which covered 4 minutes of a longer exchange that could have lasted no more than 11 minutes, according to the phone records, clearly show that Trump was focused on the 2020 election. Trump said Republicans had been cheated on this election, and everybody knows Detroit is crooked as heck, according to the recordings. Which that's not going to make people happy to hear. Just FYI, though people in Detroit have had issues voting. I mean, the lieutenant governor right now, he ran against the Detroit clerk, Janice Winfrey. And after he lost his election, my sister actually lived in Detroit at the time. So she actually voted for him when he was running against Janice Winfrey. But he claimed that there was cheating or fraudulent stuff going on, some shady stuff going on. So, Tudor Dixon did point out during the election time that lieutenant governor was a quote unquote election denier. But of course they didn't care. They don't care when their side does it. But people do have like a suspicion, or they just know that there's some things that aren't quite right with Detroit. Now, I've heard a lot of people say that they think a lot more things is incompetence than nefarious and malicious. But you aren't really allowed to fix it too much because people always point to they'll just claim that you're being racist because there's a lot of black people who work and live in Detroit. So they'll just say the reason why you're picking on Detroit is because you don't like black people or something like that. So they've never had this sort of kind of necessary oversight to maybe rearrange some things properly as far as elections. But again, it might not be something where they just plan to stuff the ballots, but there's my sister would canvass different areas and see all kinds of election things they weren't supposed to do, like, encouraging people to vote for particular candidates and having stuff up for particular candidates and Democrats and stuff in areas where you're not supposed to. And this wasn't in Detroit, but back when Bush was running for office, one of our church members went to go vote in Pontiac, and they gave him a ballot that was already marked. And they're like, I actually want to vote for the Republican. They had to give her a new ballot. So, yeah, that's obviously really messed up, but that didn't actually happen in Detroit. But that's why it's so important to have people, if you can, go ahead and you can get a job being an election day operator, poll worker, whatever. They do pay pretty well. In the case of Detroit, in the last election, not the midterm, was there the midterm or was it I think the 2020 election, they paid a lot of money. They paid very well to be election workers. So a lot of people, from my understanding, they're supposed to hire Republicans and Democrats. Well, if they're paying you very well, you want, hey, cuz they got a good job here, pay a lot of money, obscene amount of money for election day. You want to work on election day, get this X amount of dollars? Sure, I want to do that. Oh, you're not a Republican? It's fine. They'll get you the job. Like, so when people were like, who's a Republican? And there were different, like, not workers there, but volunteers looking around like, y'all didn't hire Republicans to be here to man the polls. So they have to do a better job at doing that. But there's some areas where people don't even apply, and it's hard to get Republicans in particular areas. So if you really want to make sure that the elections run as smoothly as possible, you can take some different trainings yourself. Go to your, local state party. I'm sure they'll have some kind of election day operation training, so you know what to look for, etc. But try to sign up and actually be someone who's paid that day. And if you can't do that, you can, if you're precinct delegate, those people are supposed to be over particular precincts, and but you don't have to be a precinct delegate to volunteer to watch over the precincts and stuff. Just go there and make sure everything is on the up and up that you observe. But but people should be like at different precincts to try to be the last line of defense person to say, hey, will you vote for this candidate here? Here's some information about that. Will you please not vote for this ballot measure? This is some information about it. Did you hear about this? Because some people are pretty much checked out from the election process, and on election day they're like, oh shoot, it's election day. I guess I should be civically engaged and do the responsible thing, but they don't know much about who's on the ballot, etc., blah, blah, blah. So you might be able to convince someone at the last minute to vote for a particular candidate, especially if you're the only one who gives them information. So there's a lot of things that we're not doing in behaving competently when it comes to election day operations, just to be frank. Anyway, let's continue on the article. McDaniel said if Hartman and Palmer certified the election without forcing an audit to occur, the public would never know what happened in Detroit. How can anybody sign something when you have more votes than people? Trump asked the canvassers, according to the recordings. About 13 hours after the call, Trump posted on social media about Wayne County, again saying there are more votes than people. The two harassed Patriot canvassers refused to sign the papers, Trump added, referring to Hartman and Palmer. 5 benefits of, that's ad. Trump's statement about there being more votes than people was inaccurate. There were only out of balance precincts in Detroit where there were mismatches between the numbers of ballots counted and the number of voters tracked. The absentee ballot poll books at 70% of Detroit's 134 absentee counting boards were initially found to be out of balance without explanation, and an outcome that is not unusual for the largest city in Michigan. So maybe not out of the ordinary, but could definitely do better. In addition, Trump performed better in Detroit in 2020 than in 2016, with his percentage of votes rising from 3% to 5%, and the Republicans receiving 5,200 more votes than in 2020 than 4 years earlier, according to the city's official results. Jonathan Brader, Michigan's election director, said in an affidavit that the overall difference citywide in absentee ballots tabulated and names in poll books in Detroit was 150. There were fewer ballots tabulated than names in the poll books. Brader said, if ballots had been illegally counted, there would be substantially more, not slightly fewer, ballots tabulated than names in the poll books, Brader said. The high-profile Wayne County canvassers meeting drew a national spotlight as supporters of Trump publicly urged the board not to certify the election based on unproven allegations of widespread fraud focused on vote counting in Detroit, a Democratic stronghold that's located in Wayne County. Hartman and Palmer initially voted to block the certification of the county's election, withholding the votes needed to approve certification, but later in the meeting they changed course and supported certifying the election based on the condition that an audit take place for some precincts within Wayne County. Later, Hartman and Palmer refused to sign the official certification paperwork and publicly acknowledged they received a call from Trump and McDaniel. Palmer and Hartman participated in the call inside a vehicle that was parked outside of the county election department building on East Jefferson Avenue in Detroit. Palmer said Hartman was sitting next to Palmer during the call, she said. Kinloch said Hartman and Palmer left the meeting room on that night of November 17th and never came back to sign the official statement of the votes for Wayne County. The Michigan Bureau of Elections later told county officials that the vote that occurred and the signatures of the chair or vice chair of the 4-member canvassing board and the county clerk were the only things necessary to advance certification to the State Board of Canvassers. Kinloch said the state board certified the 2020 presidential election on November 23rd, solidifying Biden's victory in Michigan. During the November 17th call, Trump specifically told the Republican canvassers they'd look terrible if they signed the certification after initially voting against certification. Chris Thomas, a lawyer who served as Michigan's elections director for more than 3 decades, said the Republican canvassers in Wayne County had no legal reason to block certification of the election. It's pretty unfortunate. Leaders offered to give them something legal protection for not doing their jobs. Offering something of value to a public official to not perform a required duty may raise legal issues for a person doing so, Thomas said. So that's the end of the article. So I don't Hartman did pass away. Monica Palmer, they got harassed a lot. She was concerned about her kids. People were leaving all kinds of crazy messages and death threats and stuff against her and Hartman for their decision to delay that certification. And but to be frank, I think people would have been angry and attacked her if they had straight away decided to do the certification. There were some people were so revved up on both sides right after that election. And as people were contesting it, like I know people who within different well, I guess I'll just say like administrative roles regarding election stuff where they were pressured by people in the GOP to go along with Trump's way of things as far as the narrative of the election, um and just being a corrupt election and stuff, and they wouldn't, and were extremely harassed by people on our own side. So it's unfortunate how crazy people get about politics. I understand people are passionate and upset about stuff, but the level of vitriol from both sides is just insane. Just absolutely insane. And it's pretty surreal because that during that time there were so many people who were like felt like this is like the end of the world, the most important thing going on in life. And that was a time where my dad was in the hospital. So I'm like, no, there's definitely things that are more important. And he was in the hospital with COVID. Well, I don't know if COVID's why he went in, but he definitely got it. And he was in there for a long time and was very close to the end at points. And it was doctors would tell us he was okay. Next thing you know, like he doesn't know who he is. We're like, what? It was definitely like being on an episode of House with ups and downs. And so I had all these friends that were like, the election, the election, the election. And I'm like, my dad, my dad, my dad. I'm like, I'm checking out a bit. I went to a few things, like I went to some dinners, Republican dinners. I did go to like a Stop the Steal rally. It was funny because they wanted all the speakers to say specific things, and there were things that they wanted me to say. I'm just like, I didn't tell them I wasn't going to say it, but I'm like, I'm definitely not saying because it was just really charged rhetoric and demand, and the demands that they wanted. I couldn't get on board with all the demands that they wanted, and so I went there to talk about basically the media's role in the election, suppressing of the Hunter Biden laptop story, and different things they didn't report about Joe and Hunter and lies they told about Trump. So my whole reason for being there was about how the media was complicit in trying to get the outcome that they got. So, and this was after Time Magazine had the shadow campaign to save the election article that had come out. So I talked about those things. I listened to a lot of people tell their perspectives about the election, and when everything broke out at first, everybody had questions about it. And people were calling Rana to say, hey, y'all got to look into Michigan because there's shady stuff that happened. There are people who were at the TFC Center who were heated and that were there for over 24 hours. You know, I got calls from people who were there as soon as they got out to tell me all the crazy stuff that had happened there. And there are people definitely behaving in ways that were shady. Um I did anyone tell me any evidence of something where there was enormous fraud that could have overcome the gap of votes that Biden had versus Trump? I can't say that I've heard anyone uh, say that kind of evidence, or that I saw that kind of evidence. To be frank, I genuinely believe that he lost Michigan, and people be ticked off that I said that. But I listened to a lot of people with their affidavit testimonies. I listened to Ruth Johnson, who was a former Secretary of State, address a lot of people, and they said that they went through a lot of affidavits, and there's things that people believed, saw something, believed it was wrong, but it wasn't like out of the ordinary or something. So they would, you know, people had um I can't blame I can't blame people for being intense about the stuff that was going on, especially when people would talk to reporters, and like the reporter, I heard an exchange where someone was explaining different things that they saw, and the things that they saw, I knew there was a reasonable explanation to it. Um, but they believed that something bad was going on. But the reporter was just kind of like, I heard you talking about Hillary Clinton earlier, so I'm just gonna everything that you're saying, I'm just throwing it right out the window. So they felt unheard that they have all this evidence and no one cares. So they don't feel like they got their honest day in court about the whole situation. So I understand people's being so emotional about this, but the backlash with all this is still just so insane. And as I already mentioned, there's people who are being indicted and have criminal cases against them, and aren't really getting help from the Trump campaign. I don't know how much help that they really gave Monica Palmer and Hartman at the time, but I do know that they're not being supportive of the electors right now. So a lot of people put their necks out on the line, and are getting the shaft for it. um, so I don't know what all is going to happen with these cases. I don't know if I don't this recording, which again I haven't heard it. They didn't put it in the article, so I don't know what all the audio actually says. I don't think it will probably hurt the electors in that case, because it has nothing to do with them. It might go more to speak about I don't know, Trump and his motivations in Michigan. So it might be a piece of evidence, nothing that's gonna, I think, keep them in jail, or send them to jail. Um, I don't know if they haven't come for Ronna McDaniel thus far. I don't know that they will. They might want to, in case they want her to flip on Trump or something. Um, I guess they could use this in the maybe I don't know about the Georgia. I guess Georgia one makes sense. Maybe the federal indictment that Jack Smith is trying to push forward before the election. I'm not totally convinced that they're going to be able to have that trial before the election, though, because I can understand why they want to politically. I can understand why they feel it is the utmost importance for to resolve it for the nation, but it's undoubtedly something that they want to push forward as fast as possible because they want it to influence the election. And that's a big no-no for the Justice Department. So I don't know for sure if if these cases are going to actually end up being a thing prior to the election. That doesn't mean that they still won't be like a top thing that's talked about. That doesn't mean that it's still not going to suck up a bunch of money. That doesn't mean that the Democrats still aren't basically playing 4D chess with us. Um, but I just don't know if they're going to get that particular win as far as getting a conviction prior to the election. I don't know. I don't know about that. We'll see. We'll definitely keep updated on that. Last thing I want to mention before I let you guys go is that Joe Biden has decided to pardon people with simple possessions and use of marijuana under the federal DC law, and is also commuting the sentences of 11 convicted nonviolent drug offenses, and and they would have been eligible to receive significantly lower sentences if they were charged today. So I think this is interesting. I suppose a lot of people are getting rid of. I mean, marijuana laws are making it legal. I don't like it. I mean, I haven't smoked it. I've smelled it. I walked by, I was shopping today and walked by in the mall, and it was like a t-shirt like kiosk or whatever, and I walked by and somebody working there just it's such a strong, disgusting smell. I don't understand it. And if you smoke it, I don't care if you're offended. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. It's, to me, it's like if BO had vomit and that was the smell. Like I hate it so much. Um, and I've never had any kind of drug or anything like that, but gosh, I don't like marijuana at all. And I don't like I don't like going so many places and the smell being there. So anyway, there's not a lot of people who get charged for just simple use of marijuana and or just possession of simple marijuana. Usually in cases where they get people with possession, different things have been pleaded down. So I don't know how much it's really helping in the long run, but what was interesting about this, as far as the narrative surrounding him preemptively pardoning people with these drug offenses, is that it strikes against a narrative with people who were defending Trump, saying that he couldn't have pardoned the January 6 people because they hadn't been convicted yet or charged yet. So there's one particular person, Julie Kelly, who's been talking a lot about the January 6 people. And at first she was complaining that enough focus and attention wasn't being directed at them, and was complaining, I think, about Trump and stuff. And at some point in time, there was a shift. And she still talks about the January 6 people, but she'll say stuff like, how come DeSantis isn't doing more for them? And it's like, what do you expect DeSantis to do? So Trump did initially, or there were reports that he was thinking about it, but he opted not to. And he pardoned a lot of people, like within his last days, that were questionable. I'm like, Kwame Kilpatrick and some rappers and other folks like that. People were really mad he didn't pardon Julian Assange and other folks like that. I don't know why. Besides, like, well, I don't understand the certain people that he did pardon. I didn't get that list. I didn't understand it. Certain people that he didn't pardon. I'm assuming people. It was for probably his political benefit of maybe wanting to come back later. Maybe a deal like with people not impeaching him again, or people not convicting him with the impeachment. I don't know. But it was possible for him to pre-pardon them without do like a blanket pardon, writing something like, I pardon all non-violent January 6 trespassers or something. And that could have been that. Maybe people would have tried to challenge it or whatever, but Carter did preemptive. He did do a blanket pardon of draft dodgers. So and usually when people try to make claims that Trump couldn't have preemptively pardoned people or whatever, did a blanket pardon, people usually bring up Carter. And so here's Joe Biden pulling this out, and I assume a lot of it is to I don't know, like a little thing that he can do to pander a bit. I don't know. Yeah, but I'm seeing people bring up the fact that Biden did this and that Trump did have that opportunity to pardon some of the January 6 people. I know people in prison right now who are not spending Christmas with their families that which is pretty wild to me. Now there were definitely people who were violent that day, who attacked cops, hit them with poles, and people were trying to break into the Capitol, were um, pushing in the doors and um, so on. There's plenty. You can find tapes of people peacefully walking around the Capitol, people going in the chambers and praying with each other. But you there's wild stuff. It's the tapes that have been released. It's a bit of a Pandora's box. There's people who are only playing like peaceful stuff and creating a narrative around it, but it doesn't make our side look great. Just to be frank, it doesn't. But there's definitely people who went there and didn't they weren't part of the riot. They weren't violent. So I wish it just had never happened, and I feel awful that it happened. Um I always felt uneasy about it. And I'm like, well, people are going, etc., blah blah blah. And then I found out that Trump was like having a rally. I'm like, oh, I didn't think that was appropriate. Like people going for like, oh, you were a great president, etc., blah blah. We love you, we'll miss you. That would have been fine. But him having a rally for to politically pressure people to make a different decision, and that's, I mean, what it was. It just wasn't a good idea. Obviously, you could smell a setup a mile away. I have no doubt that there were things that like the setup narrative, perhaps it's not as extreme as a lot of people make it out to be, but it's kind of obvious that there was the chance of that going haywire, or there being some kind of setup to damage his legacy in such a devastating way. And I guess we are kind of past the point where they would keep bringing up January 6th within every single conversation. But you'll hear that again in 2024, certainly. So again, I just wish it had never happened, and I wish everything after the election was just handled differently, and he'd be having a much smoother race. I mean, you could say, well, he's so far ahead. True. That is true. But he's also been indicted several times. So it's going to be a rough 2024. Anyway, thank you guys for joining me today. Please go to blacktnews.com, check out different content on my website. Check out different articles, different videos, etc. If you like what I do here, please consider leaving a donation at blacktnews.com/donate, because it does cost to stream and run my website, all that stuff, so you guys can support. I very much do appreciate it. Check out different merch that's available at blacktnews.com, like mugs and teas and so on. Check out also my different books that I have. You guys can follow me on Amazon, but if you go to blacktnews.com, go to merchandise page, there's a link that'll take you to my book website where you can learn more about the different things that I've written. I just write whatever comes to mind, whatever on my heart: historical fiction, fantasy, children's chapter books. I don't have any picture books out yet. We're still working on illustrations and stuff, but I have written some. Got young adult, all kinds of stuff. So go ahead and check me out. And I do thank you, everyone out there who has, purchased my stuff, left good reviews and stuff. And I'm glad your kids are enjoying Super Kid and so on. So thank you very much. One of my nonfiction books, though, is, of course, God is Blatantly Against Abortion. It covers rights and science and religion and politics. It's a very in-depth, broad sort of book on abortion, but it does cover the theological it debunks a lot of stuff that people say regarding the topic, and I found it to be so necessary, and all the time I find it to be really, really necessary to have written it. So I'm glad that I wrote it. So anyway, it's out there and you guys can check that out. I also do want to repeat what I said yesterday. I wrote an article that I feel is very important regarding the topic of abortion and the narrative of force, that people say, like, you're forcing me to have this baby, or you're pro birth and other stuff like that. So it tackles that narrative and just explains why that's silly, and it really, really, really breaks it down. So please go ahead and check that out and share it with someone, because I think that is an important conversation to have on this topic. Thank you guys so much. I hope you guys have a very Merry Christmas with your family. Try not to talk about politics too much and enjoy each other's company. God bless.